The following program is brought to you free of charge by the sponsorship of Novus Ordo Watch. See for yourself that the Church of the Second Vatican Council is not in fact the Catholic Church of the ages. Go to novusordowatch.org.
Hello and welcome to Pastoralia on the Restoration Radio Network. This show seeks to examine important questions that we don't always get to ask fathers by having a father to ask the questions of directly. Joining us, as always, is Father Stephen McKenna, who, in addition to his duties at St. Gertrude the Great, also has duties in Milwaukee and Montana and the Dakotas and Louisiana. And I don't really know what you don't cover, Father, but thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Stephen.
Before I get on with my regular list of show announcements, if you'd like to lead us in a prayer.
Sure. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Amen. St. Thomas Aquinas, patron of students, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.
You know, Father, this isn't part of our show question today, and for those of you who haven't listened to Pastoralia before, or who might have a different notion of what Pastoralia is based on the last two shows Father and I have done, Pastoralia tries to take questions that can be answered in 15, maybe 20 minutes or less, and they fill out around the periphery of Catholicism. Sometimes it's too small to be covered in a sermon, or it's just a point of etiquette. And Father and I's first two shows were rather epic in scope. In fact, I think, Father, our last show was we broke the bank on that. We went over a couple hours. So instead of covering these large themes like etiquette at Mass or etiquette towards priests, today is a return to the show I had originally pitched to Father last season when we were in pre-production, which is the idea of questions from the audience, which that means you, dear listeners, have questions for Father. You know, you've never asked a priest. You don't know why something is the way it is. This is the time to ask. And Father and I were talking before the show about Lent and how we don't want to tell other people who aren't Catholic that we're fasting and hence get their pity or whatever else. But at the same time, to be careful with our main meals. And Father, given that it's a monthly show, by the next time we have a show, we're going to be close to the end of Lent. So I thought the Pastoralia Lent edition, we might just spend a couple minutes recapping for the audience some of the conversation that you and I just had off air, which was the idea of not making your main meal more than usual to make up for the light meals of the day. Do you have any reflections on that?
Yes, absolutely. We must always remember that spirit of Lent, that spirit of mortification, and the very nature of mortification, which is that dying to ourselves, dying to our flesh, so that our spirit will be able to grow towards God. The creature comforts that we have, we find attachment to those because they bring us pleasure, but by being attached to something else, we are naturally drawn away from what we ultimately should be attached to, which is God. It's kind of splitting our time, if you will. And we want to be more focused on saving our souls, on getting to heaven, on the spiritual side of things. And so that way, when we see the law of fast for the church, and it says, okay, 2 small meals and 1 main meal, and the 2 small meals cannot add up to the main meal. Well, that doesn't mean that we change what a main meal would be for ourselves. It doesn't mean we have the feast, to end all feast every day, like the Thanksgiving Day meal, in order that we may take normal sized portions of those two other meals. No, it means that we cut down. Maybe we only have like a banana for breakfast and a little bowl of soup for the other small meal, or perhaps a little small salad or something, and then eat a normal meal at dinner time. That's the way our mindset should be. It should not be one of truly letter to the law. It should be one of the spirit of the law. It should be. We don't want to be like the one that the example that keeps coming to my mind is the for fear of persecution here, but it's for the Muslims. The Muslims, they always have their Ramadan, and I had a professor, a teacher that was in a Muslim country during Ramadan one time, and she was actually she was not Muslim herself. She just happened to be in the country, but she said she was very almost appalled by it, because during Ramadan, they don't eat or drink anything all during the day. But as soon as the sun goes down, every single day of Ramadan, they would have these enormous feasts and gorge themselves to the point where they almost, can walk around. And that's not, we're not like the infidels here. We are the true practices of the faith. And if we're fasting, then we're fasting. It should be hard. It should be penitential, and it should be something that we do not just by letter of the law, but by a true spirit of giving towards God. So,
in other words, it's supposed to be hard, right?
Exactly. It's not supposed to be easy. If your Lent is easy, you're doing something wrong, probably.
You're doing it wrong. Yeah, I'm reminded of a phrase that's said to us a lot in Marine Corps boot camp, which is pain is weakness leaving the body, right? And I suppose you could catholicize that by saying, suffering is sin leaving the body, maybe.
Yep, and or when I was playing football, the saying was, no pain, no gain, and that was what your motto basically in the weight room. Everything was no pain, no gain. Well, same thing for Lent. If you want to make spiritual gain, you have to suffer physical pain. It has to be not. I'm not saying that we should scourge ourselves to blood or anything, but it should be a little bit of a sacrifice if you actually want to have a fruitful Lent. So, and then don't forget about the most important. We talk about the spiritual being the focus of Lent. Don't forget the most important sacrifice of all for Lent is doing spiritual exercises. Taking advantage to do those things, and to make sure that we are growing in the spiritual life by extra prayers, by extra devotions, Stations of the Cross, or spiritual reading, and whatever else, what other pious activities we can think of.
The last thing I'm going to add on to that, Father, is just as a commentary, by way of commentary on your article. And if you haven't read Father's article, he wrote his first piece for True Restoration this last week, and you can find it at truerestoration.blogspot.com. But Father emphasized that the norms of the church are the minimums. They're what you have to do in order to not sin. They are not measures of virtue. So there's no, you don't get any credit, to put it in, maybe in that's the teacher in me coming out, Father, but you don't get any credit for doing what the church requires you to do. But you might get some credit, as Father said, if you were having a banana and maybe some honey with that banana, because that's a perfectly reasonable light meal, you might forego the honey. Or if it was a banana and yogurt, which would be, 1/3 of my normal breakfast. I told Father, I have pretty hearty meals. So, maybe you forego the honey. So, and keep in mind, Father's not asking you to do anything he's not doing. We're all in it together. It's Lent. So as Catholics, and we've got the Ember Days next week. So, it's the perfect time to there's no time like the present to get into Lent, I guess.
That's right.
Well, Father, we're just going to kick off right away with our first topic, which is godparents. And I have to say, whenever I've heard people say to me before, that's one of my godchildren, I've inquired further, and then I found out they had 5 godchildren. I was I might say something like, wow, that's a lot. And maybe the subtext is, this person must be really virtuous because they've got all these people asking them to be godparents. But it also made me a bit wary because I thought, being a godparent to one person is such a heady task. It's such a big ask. So I wanted to rewind back to the beginning with you and ask, what does it take to be a godparent? Who's restricted? Can I ask a priest to be a godparent? Can relatives be godparents? And is there a limit? And obviously there's some related questions, but why don't we start at the beginning, Father? What is a godparent? Why should every Christian have one?
Well, the godparent essentially is the parent of the child if in regards to the spiritual needs. Now, that doesn't mean that parents aren't the chief providers of the spiritual responsibilities for children, instilling virtue into kids and making sure they're fulfilling their duties well for their spiritual life and growing and working towards saving their souls. But the idea of a godparent essentially is that if anything were to ever happen to their true parents, their biological parents, if they were to, God forbid, die, or if they were to fall away from the faith or be negligent in their duties in some serious way, then it's the duty of the godparent to step in and make sure that the child is being cared for their spiritual needs, that they're fulfilling their duties towards God and living a life centered around the church. And that's how we should look at it when we're choosing a godparent. Rule number one of picking a godparent has to be that they are a good practicing Catholic. They are a good, traditional Catholic in good standing, and that they are overall, generally, pious people that are, God-fearing people that are trying to live a life according to the church and to save their souls. And it's oftentimes confused in today's world because people think, well, think of it as in a worldly term of this is an honor for my brother or my cousin or some sort of family member. Like, oh, I'll make them the godparent of my child because that's some sort of family honor. But no, it's not. That's not the mindset of it. It's actually to have someone that will care for the spiritual needs of the children if something were to fail for the parents in that regard. And that, oftentimes, unfortunately today, oftentimes that means someone that's not part of our family. There's many people who have children who have most of their relatives are not good practicing, traditional Catholics, and they shouldn't pick those people for godparents. They should pick someone that they know will actually do their duty as a godparent. As for number of, or ask for who to ask, like if there's someone restricted, the one that would be restricted outside of, or if you've come to the conclusion, or not come to the conclusion, now so you have to have that conclusion, is that it has to be a good practicing traditional Catholic. Then you in addition to that, you can't it can't be a priest. The priest is not allowed to be a godparent to people. He is unless it's an absolute situation of necessity. So say you're all by yourself, and there's in some sort of hinterlands of the United States, and there's no traditional Catholics around. Then there still needs to be a witness to that baptism, and someone will help out. Then possibly in that situation, a priest could be a godparent when there's nobody else available. But generally speaking, it's not really, in a way, the priest is a godparent to everybody. So it doesn't really make sense to have a priest to be your godparent. He is to care for all the souls in the parish and to not play favorites in that way. So he's not allowed to be a godparent. But any good traditional Catholics, a man and a woman should be the ones that we choose to be a godparent, and not the one that is going to, you might have a choice between two traditional Catholic friends, one that's more, timid and mild and not going to really cause waves, or one that will, if they see something wrong, will stand up and do the uncomfortable task of correcting the child, or correcting even the parent if need be. That should be the godparent choice. It should be the one that think of in terms of the soul of your own child, and say, who's going to look after the best, who's going to have the best outlook for the spiritual well-being of my child, should something happen to me. And that should be your choice for godparent. As for any kind of limit for numbers, it oftentimes comes down to, is somebody willing to take on more godchildren? Some of the best godparents I've ever seen are chosen most often because they are good at it. There was people that I've known that are older people that had 20 or more godchildren, 30 godchildren, because
that's serious.
But people knew this person is a pious person, and it's like anything else. If you want something to get done, ask a busy person. Well, and the same thing in the world of godparents. If you want someone that's going to do it right, find someone that's been doing it right for other people, and to take on another godchild, then they're going to be a good candidate for it, and which kind of leads into how a godparent should treat that duty when it falls upon them. So if you are asked for that, to be a godparent of a child, or especially if you're starting to be asked for multiple children, keep a list, an actual list of your godchildren, because like anything else, you might forget all the names if they start to add up. And it should be, with that list, it should be people that you pray for constantly, that you're always praying for. You're having masses said for your godchildren, or you're remembering remembering to check up on them and to keep tabs on them for their spiritual life, which requires of a godparent to be in touch with the parent, with the family as much as possible. Sometimes, as human nature goes, sometimes it ends up being harder than you would like it to be. But that effort should always be there. Keep in touch. Try to be a part of that family. So when there's birthdays, or there's feast days, or whatever it may be, either be at the house to celebrate it, or to at least call or send card and things like that. Not just, it's good for the sentimental part, but it's also good to keep yourself always there and involved with that family. Be a part of, you take on that name of godparent. You might not be part of the family, but you are part of their spiritual family, and so you should be a part of the family in that way. And it allows you to fulfill the other duties, especially for those times when you might have to have, as we like to call it, the little talk. If you have to, pull little Johnny or Susie aside and say, you missed Mass last weekend. What happened? Why were you not there? Why? How can we move forward? How can we get better at this? Have you been praying your rosary? Have you been doing your spiritual duties? And those times when nobody wants to, but out of duty we have to, for the good of their soul, to pull them aside and talk to them a little bit. You can only really do that if you're part of their life. If you're asked to be a godparent, you're there for the ceremony, and then you don't really talk to them anymore. Your words of correction don't really hold much weight. But if you're constantly part of their life, then they will be more apt to listen to the corrections that you might need to provide. And in all, with that is also the duty of the godparent to be that good example in their own lives, because you mentioned at the beginning of the show, Stephen, being coming from the a military background a bit. Any military person would say that the best leaders are the ones who do not demand respect but command respect, meaning that the leader doesn't just yell and shout for people to obey them, but leads by example, and those are the ones that people want to follow. Same thing, especially for the spiritual life. If they see someone who's living a good and pious life and trying to strive for their own souls, then they realize it's more than just, people will realize it's more than just words, and they'll put more credence into the words that you do say because you're living it yourself. And so that's, the duty of a godparent is a great duty, and it's a necessary duty. And, people should be honored if they're asked to be a godparent, but they should also view it as, as almost like as an offer.
The lifetime contract.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lifetime contract, and it's something that is a great honor, but it is like anything else. That honor comes with responsibility, and a responsibility that is a very serious one.
Father, there's lots of vistas that are open to us here, and I see we have a caller, so someone must have a question about godparents, and I will get to you in a moment, caller. But I wanted to. Boy, I have all these notes from the last few minutes of your talking, Father. So I want to go backwards before we can go forward. So going backwards, can I ask, is there an age limit? Is someone too young to be a godparent? Obviously, there's no age limit on virtue, and that's something that you stress. But can someone be too young or too elderly? Because there's the practical side of being a godparent too, and if you could possibly die before the parents would die, then there might be a function lost there. So, can you just comment on that, please?
Sure. Someone for the lower end of the spectrum, someone to be a godparent should be someone, or has to be someone who's baptized themselves and should be confirmed themselves. You have to have somebody. You don't want somebody who's 6 years old or just baptized being the godparent. They don't know their own spiritual duties themselves. You should be picking the minimum requirement has to be someone who's baptized and confirmed themselves, but it should be in the grand scheme of things, it should be somebody who is actually of an age that they're going to be fulfilling their own spiritual duties on their own accord, not because their own mom and dad are telling them to do it, but because they are virtuous people who are doing it themselves. So usually, the general idea is someone who's basically of pretty much of an adult age that has responsibilities themselves, that has spiritual responsibilities themselves, and they can take care of it themselves. That way, they can look out for the well-being of the child. As for elderly, you shouldn't necessarily turn away from an older person from doing it. Now, if that person is 95, could die before the child even reaches the age of reason or something, or before they can, get, ideally someone that would hopefully be around, at least until their godchild becomes an adult themselves, to see them through those tough years of adolescence when, they're most likely going to be tempted to stray away, and to lay down those good foundations. It doesn't have to be someone that's going to be there until, the child is of a ripe old age themselves, but it should be somebody that will be around at least for a little while anyways. So.
For those of you who are just joining us, you're listening to Pastoralia on the Restoration Radio Network. I'm Stephen Heiner. I'm joined, that voice you just heard is Father Stephen McKenna, and we're talking godparents for the first part of our show today. We've already had a caller, even though I didn't give out the number. I forget that it's listed on the website all the time, and that telephone number is 949-272-9417, 949-272-9417. If you have a burning question to ask Father, please give us a call, and we'll be happy to do that. Father, now to pivot from the age requirement, some people may be listening and say, okay, Stephen, Father, you all are sedevacantists, and we've always tried to make the point that Restoration Radio is a Catholic radio station. Most of the hosts and guests have come to the conclusion of sedevacantism because we don't see another Catholic way to reconcile what we see in front of us. So that being said, people may say, well, Father, I know holy people in the Novus Ordo. I know holy people in the MOTU, SSPX. Can I ask someone to be a godparent, with the caveat, hey, don't take my kids off to the SSPX, because then this ties a little bit into the question of how much am I allowed to interfere? Sometimes families are at the same spiritual level at the time of baptism, but maybe one family gets more, how shall we say, rigorous, and then another family gets more lax, or vice versa. So then a little bit of a tie into etiquette, how can I interfere is the wrong word. What's the line? And so I guess you have to answer the first question: what's the pool of applicants that I can pick from? And then once I pick someone, what are my limits as far as etiquette and Catholic charity? My responsibility as a godparent to interfere in what we think is a bad situation.
All right. Well, the first part of it is, dealing with the position of, as you said, for us, for sedevacantism, is that you should pick someone who is of the same position as you. We, like you said about Restoration Radio, we are Catholics. That's, that is what we are. Any kind of other terminology put towards it, traditional Catholic, sedevacantist, whatever it may be, is not truly a category. We are purely Catholics, and the sedevacantist position is the Catholic position in regards to the crisis that we are in. Now, that doesn't mean that there are not good and pious people that, like you said, may be going to the SSPX or the MOTU Mass or anything like that. But it's the recognition that this is, if you're presenting a child for baptism, you have to think that while you don't want anything to happen to you, what if something does? And a person of a different mindset towards the crisis in the church is not, even if they say so with their mouth, cannot be legitimately guaranteed to fulfill your wishes in regards to the Catholic rearing of the child, given the current crisis we're in the church. And if you want to guarantee that is fulfilled, then pick someone who is of the same position as yourself, because that is it's otherwise you're putting someone in a position where, even if they have not come to that conclusion of sedevacantism, you're asking someone essentially to violate their own conscience, whether it's a good conscience or a bad conscience. Is neither here nor there. You're asking someone to go against what they believe to provide. It's akin to asking someone who's a Protestant to raise your child Catholic. They don't believe it themselves, and they're not going to see a need to look after the enforcing that in the child. So that's important to know in that regard. What was the other part of the question, Stephen? I'm sorry.
What's the latitude that we have for interfering when we see a family situation? I'll give you an example so that people may not think I'm being so abstract. You have a family who has a television in the house, right? And you're the godparent. And let's say you're even in a situation where once a month or once a quarter, you take the godchild to mass with you. I'm thinking an ideal situation. Mm-hmm. So the topic doesn't necessarily come up to talk about television. So let's say you come by Saturdays, pick up the 10-year-old godchild, go to mass together, maybe go out and grab a bite to eat afterwards. Is there a not only a way that satisfies charity as a fellow Christian, but also satisfies our duty as godparents to speak to those issues that aren't necessary? Because again, back to what we started the show with, talking about the minimums that the church presents with Lent, right? Those are the minimums. Okay, so perhaps it may be argued, and that's probably for another show, Father, television is not in and of itself sinful. So the question will be, it's not a direct threat to the faith. Right now, Bishop Dolan and Bishop Sanborn would be all over me for saying something like that, but I'm trying to stretch it as best I can. How is there a way? Is there a limit? How do I make that correction? How can I encourage my godchild to step away from something that is a true danger to the faith, like television, without attacking the authority of her parents, which is also something that's a fourth commandment. We've got to thread that needle, and what would be it's obviously an idealized, made up situation, but I think people will understand from whatever general principles you give them.
Yes, well, the ultimate idea of it is that, especially in front of the child, it should not be one of tearing down the respect for a parent at all. But at the same time, you can go about it in a way that you're speaking towards the virtue. So if a child has the parents have TV in the house, and that it's something that is watched in the house, you can very easily talk about this. Certain types of shows or certain types of media are not appropriate for a Catholic to watch, and that they should refrain from those things and not follow through with it. And if need be, if there's something where you're saying one thing and the parents truly are saying or acting in a contrary way, then the first course of action should be speak to the virtue to the child without breaking down the chain of command, I guess you would, in their life, and then pull the parents aside and say, listen, you're creating a situation here that's bad for the child, and do that away from the child and say, you need to, if you're going to watch TV yourselves, put it in a place that only you watch it, and then, only make sure you're only showing, decent programs like, Catholic movies and things like that to the child, and not just letting them watch, TV without any kind of filter at all on it as to what they're watching content wise. All care should be taken to try to uphold that balance. Now, if it ultimately reaches a head and nothing is being done, then the ultimate goal of the godparent is to steer the child away from sin. And if there's truly a situation that is ultimately there's no way around fixing it other than dealing with it head on, then you can, but it always has to be done with that mindset in our head of, I have to uphold the respect for their parents as much as possible in that regard, because one of the chief duties of a child is to honor and obey their parents, and we don't ever want to break that down if we can ever at all avoid doing so. 9 times out of 10, there's going to be a way of dealing with it tactfully, where you speak to virtue to the child and then kind of pull the parents around for a little talk of their own and try to get them back on course. If it's not going anywhere after trying it in that route, and you're really up against truly stiff opposition, then ultimately your duty is towards the soul of the child. And I don't think a godparent, they shouldn't micromanage every single thing, a godparent also shouldn't feel like they can't speak to a child or speak to their godchild and say, listen, this is what you need to do for virtue. That's your job. That's why I was chosen for this position, and that's my duty, and I'm going to fulfill it, because you'll have to. A godparent will have to render an account for that to God on His own judgment, and they should take care to fulfill it.
I think that's part of the question that our caller from Canada has is about those responsibilities. Ma'am, please go ahead. You're on the air with Father.
Hello, Father. Yes,
hello.
As a matter of fact, yes. Hello, Father. You hear me?
Hi.
Hello,
yes,
can you
hear
hear
you.
me?
Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Yes, I find that our host, I found that he has really illustrated very well my concern And the other problem that I also have related to my responsibility as a godmother towards my goddaughter is also the fact that I'm a recent sedevacantist, like for less than a year. So I've been a godmother when I was in the Novus Ordo. Now, I come from a family that is was very practicing, very dedicated towards our faith and all that. But, my sister, and the generation of, the youth generation today, very much influenced by society and everything, they just, for them, like the faith is like almost like it's just like maybe like a cultural tradition, or it's just like it's something that is very secondary in their life. And myself, I'm trying, and my relation, and the problem is I'm having a very hard difficulty of having a relationship in the first place with my goddaughter because of that. There's also family issues involved too. The fact, so how, I don't even know where to begin right now, like to establish, to work out this relationship with my goddaughter. And the fact that I'm new in the Sedevacantists as an out of Novus Ordo, and they are in the Novus Ordo, and they don't see the difference. Like to them, it's just like Chinese. So, what do you do in a situation like this?
How old is your goddaughter?
She's 21 right now.
21,
what's her big concern? Her concern right now is just her studies, like studying to become a dentist. She's not at all interested, like spirituality. Her spirituality, her relationship with God, that's to her like it just goes 20 feet above her head. And
right, yeah.
I still have a responsibility, but I just feel like I just don't know where to begin. And the relationship Novus Ordo and Sedevacantism as well. Like I feel it's like there's an humongous bridge there, or a gap there between both of us. And
right.
even with the faith of the parents as well, not to mention it.
Sure. Exactly. Yes, I understand completely. In a situation like that, especially where she's a grown adult herself,
yeah, exactly.
We have to always remember what the chief duty of a godparent is, and that is our prayers. To be vigilant in praying for something. To pray is not to be passive. That is not a passive action. Mm-hmm. We have to pray and pray with confidence to God in that way. It's often you can compare it to a parent even of someone who is who has grown and then fallen away on mm-hmm. their own. Oftentimes what can a parent do besides pray? And so our prayer should be first and foremost in that. And if there's then just continually try to be involved in her life, even just in a way of just of a presence there.
Her birthday and her
right,
birthday
exactly.
And do things like that.
And then don't ever be afraid to mention spiritual topics and talk to them and things like that, and try to get them back to simple things such as doing prayer, trying mm-hmm. to get them to pray the rosary or mm-hmm. Do little spiritual duties on their own, and those graces can will start to build upon their soul, and then perhaps in the future with that grace, then it opens the door for possibly bringing them along towards tradition in the long run. If there's ever a chance to bring them to the mass or something like that, that's a good opportunity too, just to expose them
even in the mass.
Right, to
even
the mass.
For me, in the mass, we don't even, like we have the Novus Ordo Mass. We don't even have the traditional Mass here in Ontario, like where I live. So it would be the Novus Ordo Church.
Well,
so
in that case, then in that case, really would be the getting them to pray the rosary and getting them to really start to develop, even if in a small way, some sort of prayer
to
life.
see the
Perhaps,
like in their case, it would be like right from the beginning would be like to to get them back, to initiate them to their relationship with God, like to consider God in your life. That's how terrible.
Correct.
This is how bad the situation is.
Right.
Like they almost make a fun of being Christian almost sometimes.
Yeah. And in those situations, that's where we really fall back on our own prayer, and then also just something as simple as when you send a birthday card, or put a little prayer card in there. Something a prayer to,
or a green scapular, maybe.
Yeah, or a green scapular, or a green. Do you know the green scapular?
Oh yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So
try to find some around here. There's no religious store. Have a hard time. It's terrible. I'm telling you, we're in a terrible situation here in the north.
If you write to a letter to Saint Gertrude the Great and address it to me, then and just say that I was the caller, and I will send you some green scapulars and sacramentals, and
I would like that.
Yeah, and then otherwise, even just prayer cards, you can find. I'll send you up some of those too. But you can get prayer cards and through online, through the internet and stuff like that. Just little reminders that are there, like breadcrumbs, leading them back to the faith. And then once again, your chief duty is going to end up having to be on your knees. But the truly the greatest thing you can do is to pray for them. So.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your answer, Father, and it's a little bit more reassuring, because right now I found it like I felt a little bit some kind of guilt personally, because I felt like like, what am I really doing? Am I taking my responsibility seriously and all that?
Oh, don't ever lose heart, and always, like we oftentimes say to parents of the same situation is, remember Saint Monica and how far away Saint Augustine fell, and what did she do? She prayed so heartily for him, and ultimately that is what won his soul back to the faith, and what made him such a great saint was the vigilant prayers of Saint Monica, and so just always maintain that true trust in God and that hope that He will answer our prayers. He's promised it to us, and we may never see it in our lifetime, but we know that He's going to, by our prayers, He will truly give graces where they're necessary if we're faithful in asking for them.
Thank you very much, Father. I really appreciate your support.
You're welcome.
Thanks for calling.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, Father. Well, with that, let's pivot into our next topic, which is the dress of priests. And one of the things I chatted about here, I was just on the subway yesterday here, and I saw a priest in a cassock. It's called a soutane here in France. And I'm sure I thought to myself, this guy has got this person. I said, this person has to be a Society of St. Pius X priest. Because I was in the arrondissement where Saint Nicolas is, which is, for those of you who don't know, Pius X has a huge church here in Paris. They do 6 masses on Sunday. It's totally packed out. And I could see that he was saying the rosary, just the way he had his hands, and I could see he was saying words under his breath. So I thought to myself, well, this is priest. Now he's wearing a soutane, a cassock. And that is normative here, has always been normative in France, to wear the cassock all the time. And it is sort of a sign of modernism. This is what I've been told by the traditional faithful here, to wear clericals. That being said, on the other hand, this has not been the case in the United States. And one of my good friends here, actually, in France, who speaks enough English to get into excitable discussions with me, had said, I've seen Bishop Sanborn in this clerical garb. He's wearing pants and a clerical suit. Isn't this Novus Ordo? Why don't you all wear cassocks there? And so this is a two-part question, Father, is what is the custom in the United States? What has been the custom? And is there a reason to go against the custom when, let's say, the custom has, how can I put this? If the custom in the United States has been different, does a crisis necessitate maybe changing the custom and going a little more hardcore than has been the custom in the United States? So if you could give some context and explanation, I'm sure not just our European friends, but even our American listeners who probably don't know the history of why Father wears clericals. The one time maybe Father McKenna looks like a Novus Ordo priest. What's going on with that?
All right. Well, first off, for the United States, anyways, there was in the 1800s. There was the Council of Baltimore that happened here in the United States, and what it was a council that were held to deal with issues for the country here, the United States of America, and that were particular to here. And at the time of that council, there was great persecutions actually going on in the United States against the Catholic faith. There was, Catholics were looked down upon. I think of the city my home state, Massachusetts, in particular. This was before the large influx of Irish and Italians to the country, and during that time, at least I know that throughout the United States, and especially in places like Massachusetts, you would go by shop buildings and it would say, Catholics need not apply for jobs. That's how bad it was. And the original cathedral built for Boston didn't have windows on the lower level of the church. It only had an upper level windows of the church originally because of the fact that the persecution was so bad. They were afraid of either the stained glass being smashed or the church even being firebombed by Protestants. And so the faith was very much under attack, and things that would that were truly points of ridicule to the faith were the cassock worn by the priest, because it was truly an anti-clerical society, and also the tonsure on the head and things like that. And so, for the sake of protecting the faith against some of the ridicule, the norms for it were put out that here in the U.S. that if a priest is on church property or doing sacred functions, then he should wear the cassock. But if he's out and about, going to the market or just as you said, like riding the subway or something, then a clerical suit is the proper wear for that priest. Now, obviously, the persecution is not as great in the United States any longer, and so with that mindset, there's some area of leeway given in that. So, for instance, just recently, one of our parishioners had asked all the clergy from St. Gertrude's over for dinner. Devout parishioner of ours, and several of us were working around the church, and we're in cassock all day, and it's just easier to hop in the car and drive over to the person's house. There's no need to transfer into the suit and everything like that, than to go over to a parishioner's house or whatever it may be. But generally speaking, if we were to go out, we would wear the clerical suit. It's not a point of modernism. It's just a point of custom for the country. And in fact, that idea of the SSPX, that in France, like you said, it being such a strong hold there in France, the SSPX has this idea that they wear the cassock all the time, no matter what. Everywhere they go, whether it be airplanes or trains or shopping or whatever it may be, they're always in cassock.
Or playing soccer as a seminarian.
Yeah, exactly, and that's just. And people need to realize that is not a Catholic idea. That is a SSPX idea. It is a bizarre idea that they have adopted for themselves, and because they seem to have a large number of people, then they in turn have created this interpretation of to not wear the cassock is liberal. Well, no, it's not. Actually, if you go back, the cassock was not always the day-to-day travel around clerical garb of the clergy before. Actually, the common wearing, even in Europe, of the cassock out on your daily duties is not something that came about until after the French Revolution. Before then, there was, the daytime attire of the priest, the street attire, if you will, of the priest was something that was more akin to a clerical suit. It was perhaps a little bit longer, but it was certainly not the long soutane or cassock that we see today as they went out and about. It was after the Revolution that the clergy started, the wearing of the cassock everywhere on the street. It became more in vogue for France, and and in fact, because of that idea being truly an SSPX idea and not something that is, strictly speaking, anti-modernism, that people like Bishop Sanborn or Bishop Dolan or any of us, if we were to travel to France, there would be times that we would wear the clerical suit when out and about, not only because it's our custom as Americans, but it's done to make sure that people don't confuse us with the SSPX, because we don't want to be confused with the SSPX, and we don't want to take an idea that is, their own creation, bow down because that's what the society does. That's not us. That's their own thing that they've created. And people should recognize that. People should realize that a clerical suit is still, the cleric is the priest is still dressed as a cleric. He's still distinguishable as a priest, and in no way is it disrespectful to the priesthood, or in no way is it in any way, hiding that fact. And then you hit on another part, like you said, playing soccer at the seminary. Wearing a cassock, playing soccer or playing sports or whatever it may be, or doing like physical work and things, that's something that is, I guess you could almost say that's basically almost a Pharisaical mindset. I got to, even in this time of rigorous activity and rigorous exercise, have to be wearing this long soutane. And, as someone who has to buy his own soutanes and his own cassocks, and they're costing hundreds of dollars, I'm not going to go out and start diving across the mud and, sweating up a storm and ruining this really expensive cassock that I'm wearing. No, it's a practical point of view. If I'm playing, a sport, or I'm, digging and planting trees in the yard or something like that, people who I'm with, if I'm playing sports, usually the people that I'm with are going to be fellow parishioners, and they know that I'm a priest, and they know that I'm playing sports, and the two doesn't take away from the person who is in the priesthood. It's it's a point of practicality. I'm not going to sleep in my cassock as my nighttime wear. I'm not going to go to the gym in my cassock as gym wear. That's it really is a Pharisaical mindset, and something that we should go away from. It's not that we don't love the cassock, and if like I said, if anybody ever comes to St. Gertrude's or to any of our other chapels, they will see us on the grounds always in cassock, because that's our uniform, if you will. But that being said, we have to have a balance, and a healthy balance, and a balance that is truly the mindset of the church. If you went back, before the things like Society of St. Pius X existed, that's what you would have found your average clergyman doing. Wearing the appropriate garb for what activities they were doing, and also having street clothes, especially in certain parts of the world, like the United States.
Yeah, and I suppose there, Father, as I was hearing you talk, I think of the difference between a religious habit and a cassock. They're not the same thing, and there's probably more of a much stronger sense of what you're talking about. We're used to watching Benedictines go gardening, even though they probably have a work habit and a let's say choir habit, but it's right. Not the same thing. A cassock isn't just a priestly version of a religious habit. It's slightly different, and that's why I think some of those norms that you talk about are important.
Right, and on the flip side of it, it's when we're performing sacraments, and sacred functions, we do wear our cassocks because of the dignity of something like a sacrament. If I'm, I wouldn't go and approach the altar for mass or benediction or go into the confessional and whatnot in just a normal suit, and because it's such a dignified thing that it merits something like the wearing of a cassock. That is what is that's what's mandated by the church for those things. But as for going to the grocery store, all wearing a cassock would do is really serve to create wonder and strange looks from the faithful, and that's not what the faith is about. We're supposed to be all things to all men. We're not supposed to cause people to go, well, that's weird. That's a strange thing to do. So we're supposed to we're supposed to kind of move about that people know we're priests, yes, but at the same time we're not just we're not in the business of shock and awe, if you will. So
right, we'll leave that to the U.S. military. Well,
right, exactly.
Father, we'll move on to our next topic. For those of you who are just joining us, you are listening to Pastoralia on the Restoration Radio Network. I'm Stephen Heiner, along with Father Stephen McKenna, who's not just going through the questions that we have today, but he's also taking phone calls. We've been talking about godparents. We just finished talking about the cassock, and we're going to move on to talking about head coverings. A reminder that Pastoralia is a production of the Restoration Radio Network, and all rights are reserved. Any duplication on any channel or any media without express written permission is forbidden, and permission to broadcast or reproduce can be obtained by writing to mail, MAIL, @truerestoration.org. Father, we were talking about garb for yourself. Now we're going to move on to garb for women inside a church. And there's some confusion here, and I think obviously this comes with all of the confusion around the crisis as to what's a law, what's a custom, what's a tradition. Are mantillas only for Spanish people? Some people sometimes put on the equivalent of, I call them napkins. What's the bare minimum? Oh, you need a covering on your head. Here's a cocktail napkin, and that counts. And going back to letter of the law, spirit of the law. So can you clarify for us, what is church law regarding this? What's church custom? And what should be the spirit that informs the letter of this law?
Okay. Well, when we talk of head covering for women, it's actually more than just church law. It's actually something that is scriptural, and in that way kind of crosses over into the divine. That's why when people question and say, well, in modern times that we're living in, it's unusual for a woman to wear a head covering. When are you going to adapt? Well, I can't just say, well, you're right. We'll just change our ways, because it's something that is not just a law of the church. It's something that actually is written in scriptures itself, and that's why for head coverings for the sacred services such as mass and the sacraments and things like that, we should enforce that head covering of women, because you can find that in the first book of the first letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians, where it says that in chapter 11 verse 5 it says, "But every woman praying or prophesying with her head not covered disgraceth her head, for it is all one as if she were shaven." And then later on, it tells us kind of a little bit of why. Therefore, this is verse 10, "Therefore ought the women to have a power over their head because of the angels." And that power is that veil. So when you're attending Mass or you're attending any of the sacraments, the woman covers her head out of humility because of the presence of all of heaven there, and in that way. And so it's an act of humility. It's an act of respect for the grand presence of
of angels at the mass, and it's something that should be looked upon not only as a duty, but as something that that women should take great care for, not as a source of the vice of pride, but of a truly spiritual proudness of that I'm doing what I can to obey and to respect God and the angels, and to do all I can to serve Him as He has asked me to, and it also is something that when we look at the difference between men and women, the typical man and the typical woman, from a natural point of view, it makes sense too as well. Naturally speaking, women take great pride in their hair and care to have different styles and in grooming and take
Father, are you saying that women care about fashion?
Well, I mean, I don't want to accuse of anything unjustly, but I suppose that if the shoe fits in this case, or the veil fits in this case, then we should wear it. But it's true. It's and I think I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's good that women care on how they present themselves, because if done appropriately, it comes across in a very elegant and feminine way, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. But because of that, and because women on the natural level have a more draw towards their own personal vanity, or towards compare and contrast between other women and things like that, that that is part of the reason why it is implemented in the church. Now, the reverse side of it is men. Men who might have some variance in haircut or whatever it may be, but at the same time, if the barber screws up on a man's haircut, his attitude is, well, it'll grow back in a few weeks anyway, it's no big deal, and just kind of moves on, and okay, I'll comb my hair, it'll take me all of 3 minutes, or if that, so it's that we have to recognize the difference between men and women, and in that natural makeup of who they are. And so, because of that,
that's so Pelagian of you, Father. Saying that there's differences between men and women. You're just off the program for sure.
Yeah, exactly. I look forward to your angry letters, feminists who. But it's true. I mean, until people, it was forever recognized in society. It was not that one is better than the other. It's just that there are truly differences between men and women, and we recognize that. And so for women, it's we take care in that way, and so they wear the proper head covering because of it. Now, what is the rule? They should have their head covered. That they should have it veiled in that way. And so, like you said at the beginning, there's the whole litany of options, whether it be veils or chapel veils or mantillas or a hat or napkin. And anything that is a head covering would work. And we kind of joke a little bit about the old lady who throws a napkin on, pins a napkin to her head. But in reality, what a great act of humility that is. Not that people should all of a sudden start showing up with napkins, like table napkins on their head. But at the same time, in a pinch, it works, and it shows that the spirit of the woman is, no, I'm going to try to fill this respect that I have for God by going into chapel, by finding anything I can to fulfill that requirement. And I don't necessarily really care if it looks a little goofy, as long as I can, go and pray to God as He would want me to. But at the same time, we shouldn't let it be a barrier keeping women from church. So, I think of like the ladies who come and drop their children off at St. Gertrude's for school, or that happen to be dropping something off at the church or whatever it may be. And they think, I can just make a quick visit. And if they forgot their veil because they weren't planning on making a visit, or there was no veils available in the vestibule for some reason, it should not, it's the spirit of the law. It shouldn't stop them from going in
and making a visit. If they can put a veil on or a head covering on, they should, and they should try to take care to do so. But if it came down to making a visit to the Blessed Sacrament or not making a visit to the Blessed Sacrament, then our common sense and our spirit says, well, make the visit to the Blessed Sacrament. That's more appropriate. And the same thing with fulfilling Sunday
there's ways
obligation.
to improvise around that, right, Father? I mean, you could if you had a scarf with you, which is a sort of a law here in Paris, you have to have a scarf with you when you go out. I suppose you could use that as a makeshift veil, or if you had some sort of some other kind of cloth, you could do that. I understand what you're saying about spirit of the law. Obviously, outside of improvisation, I think don't let the lack of a veil, stop you from time with our Lord if that's not something you have on hand. But at a place like St. Gertrude's, there's always extra chapel.
Oh yeah, I assume that they do exist, but I've never been to a chapel that doesn't have like a little basket of veils in the vestibule for people coming, just in case, because that's what happens. I mean, it's something that you have to remember to bring, and like anything else, it's possible to forget it. So the church tries to provide. Most churches will try to provide for the ladies in that way, and have chapel veils at the front, or like you said, if they have a scarf or something like that, they can put it on over their head to improvise in those situations. But if you ever found yourself truly in a situation that there was nothing, don't let it keep you from coming, even if that means Sunday Mass. That it would be much more important to fulfill your Sunday obligation. Say you showed up to church, you didn't have a scarf, you didn't have a veil because you forgot it, and the entire basket was emptied of chapel veils. Well, what's the better thing? Is it to miss Sunday Mass because you didn't have a veil, or is it to go to Sunday Mass? No, go to Sunday Mass. Our Lord knows your intention. Our Lord knows your spirit. But that being said, don't just easily excuse yourself well, I didn't bring it, and I'm just going to pretend I don't see this basket of chapel veils and walk in there because I really just don't want to wear a veil. And that's not the right spirit to have. But if you ever found yourself truly in that situation, then the more important thing is to honor our Lord by our prayers in that way. That being said, when we have the like you said, the options, when we think in terms of spirit of the law, once again, we see many people, and I'm not talking down, they're certainly fulfilling the law and they're not doing anything wrong in that way. But if we're really trying to adopt that spirit of the law, the 3-inch in diameter little tiny doily that some people will put on their head, that's not really going above and beyond to fulfill that spirit. It should be, we should encourage the use of things like mantillas that are longer and can cover the length of hair, or a hat where we can, or a woman can, put on a very nice hat for our Lord, and in that way not only honor the law of respect due to God and the angels, but also have something that is part of their Sunday best. In that way, it's sort of like a man putting on a nice suit, or a woman putting on a nice dress for our Lord for Sunday. If the head covering is there and you can put on a very nice and an elegant hat, then you're doing even more to show that ultimate respect and love for God, and that trying to follow through with the Sunday best in attire in that way, but also covering the hair. When a woman should have that covering, so there's no distraction to anybody else, and there's no distraction to themselves, whatever it may be. It's just everything is focused back on our Lord. Everything is focused on God Himself. So
yes, just as a reminder to women, men, we can be easily distracted, especially if it's beautiful hair. I know that might be shocking to hear that. That's not our choice. This is how God created us. We admire beautiful things. So keep us in mind, ladies, when you're thinking about getting that length of veil. Is it you have all week to display your lovely hair? That maybe that hour or 2 hours that you're inside Mass on Sunday, that may not be the best time to show off how lovely it is. That it's not just the law of God, as Father has talked about, but it's helpful to your fellow Christian men. And do have a thought for us every now and then. Father, I think it's a good time for us to pivot on to our next topic today, which is Sundays. And something that I have to say genuinely that I love about Europe is that things are not open on Sunday. Now, you might argue it's because they don't like to work very much here in Europe, but this is even true in Germany, where they actually do work. And it's because of an ancient Christian tradition. Now, that being said, I'm not saying that everyone's a big practicing Catholic here in Europe, but what it means is I don't think anyone's going to volunteer to do more work when the 1,000-year tradition has been to not work on Sunday. Even the pharmacy here, each neighborhood, each arrondissement here in Paris, they take turns as to who is open on Sunday. So yes, a pharmacy has to be open because you may get really sick and you may need help. But if you go to each pharmacy on Sunday, it'll have posted who the pharmacy is that's open. So they rotate. So they don't even. So it's very hard to conduct commerce. In England, they would say trading hours. They don't trade on Sundays. So I really love this because I find that culturally, I'm forced to have even more respect for Sundays than I would in the United States. I think in the back of your mind in the United States, well, if I really need something, I can go on Sunday. I've always had the flurry of Saturdays is try to get all your errands done. Well, in France, you have the additional thing of, well, you better get all your ingredients too, because it'll be hard. I'm not saying there are no markets open in Paris, but it's hard to find a place that's open. So if you want to put together a meal for your family, you need to do that all ahead of time. And I think that's a good Catholic thing. We're prepared. We don't just let life happen to us. But what should we, there's 2 points to this question, Father. What should we be doing on Sundays? That's the higher calling. So that's the do good. And then the avoid evil part is, what can't we do on Sundays? What really should we look at and say, you can't do that? Because the definition of work can be hazy, especially with modernity. We don't have to churn our own butter anymore. And hopefully you're having real butter as opposed to margarine, but that's a discussion for another show. So can you talk about that a little bit, Father?
Sure. First, I will take your 2 questions and then I will reverse them. And I'll deal with what we can't do first, because I think if we lay out, like anything of the laws of the church, oftentimes we have this mindset of, all the churches, all a church of, thou shalt not type of deal, that there's all these things that I can't do because I'm a Catholic. But if we realize it and look at them as truly as guidelines for our soul, then it really opens up a liberating factor of, well, because I can't do these things, I know what I can do, and we can move out from there, and it's a liberating actuality to it. So for things that we can't do, the church first off tells us that any kind of servile work is forbidden on a Sunday. Now that's kind of a broad brush stroke, if you will. But so what does it mean for servile work? What do we have to refrain from? And that is anything that's of a physically demanding nature that would be require us to do that basically doesn't have to be done. So, for instance, I shouldn't be out remodeling my deck on Sunday. That is a servile work where we're doing physical labor on a Sunday where we really we should not be doing so. Our God asks us to our Lord rested on the seventh day, and so therefore we too should follow suit and rest on that day and view it as that period of rest. And so any time for physical work, that the general rule of thumb is don't do it. Now there are some exceptions to that. Obviously, you don't have to look any further than the priest. He's Sunday is not a day of rest for a priest. He is constantly working on Sunday, but that is something.
Yeah, that might be your busiest work day of the week, isn't it, Father?
Oftentimes it is, yes. And but at the same time, it's it's not servile. It's not just work for the sake of some sort of temporal gain or some sort of work for no end towards God. Ultimately, it is work purely for God that we're doing, and so anytime, and that extends to the laity as well. If there's something to be done for the church, say you're the sacristan and you're setting up vestments, or you're working at the taking up the collection, or you're doing some necessary repair jobs to a vestment or something like that needs to be done, really quickly or something, then those things, you're doing work for God, you're doing work for the church, and in that way, it's not in any way servile, and it's allowable. Now, if there's things that can be done other times easily enough, and they fall into that category, then we should try to take advantage of it as a day of rest. But if they're necessary, then and it's for the church or for God, then it shouldn't be looked at all as servile work. Also, the idea of just necessary work in general. You can't go all Sunday without preparing a meal. You have to eat, and so therefore, it requires work to cook. So you cook, and you can't go without. You can't just leave a whole bunch of dirty dishes in the sink. So you'll probably have to wash dishes as well, and those things are necessities. So you can't go without it, and so that certainly doesn't fall under any kind of probation for Sundays, and even in things of charity. So I wouldn't go out and start working on my car on a Sunday, because if I was more mechanically inclined, anyways, I wouldn't go out and work on my car on a Sunday. But if I was driving and I saw someone broken down on the side of the road, and I could help out in that way, changing the tire or doing some work on their engine to get them so they can make it to where they're trying to go, then charity is the highest of the virtues, and so we should not hesitate to exercise any kind of act of charity on a Sunday, just because we can't just leave someone stranded and say, well, I'd help you out, but it's Sunday, so therefore it looks like you're going to freeze to death on the side of the road, because I can't help you change that tire, ma'am. So it's always that mentality of what that spirit of the law. We're not Pharisees. We're not going to condemn the person who. We're not going to condemn our Lord for healing on the Sabbath. It's that idea of what's the all things coming back towards God. And even when we talk about rest and for the day of rest, that oftentimes includes a recreation. And just because a recreation is something that is legitimately able to be done. So if a man works in a factory and is constantly doing all this really heavy physical labor, and to him to come home and kind of do a little bit of working around his garden is not only going to be a recreation but therapeutic to him and a way for him to relax, then he should feel free to go out and do that. But at the same time, you shouldn't be out there. That's not the day to be planting shrubs and digging these huge holes and stuff. But if he goes out and trims off like dead branches and pulls a few weeds and things like that, and just kind of, if you will, putts around the garden and do little things because it's something that he or she enjoys and is therapeutic and it's not labor intensive, then things like that are okay. One thing that I oftentimes hear and see of, though, is that so many people, it's like they'll save their laundry for Sunday, and then they'll just do all their laundry on, like, Sunday's like the universal worldly laundry day, it seems like. And that's something that why do all your
why do those things? It just takes your mind, away from that spirit of Sunday for works like that, laundry or spring cleaning day or yard work day. That's not what Sunday is made for. But if it's little putts around the house type of thing, and you do a little work in your garden, or you perhaps do a little bit of picking up some papers from work that you're doing on the counter from the night before or something like that, then that's something that is certainly allowable. Now that kind of brings us to what should we be doing on Sunday. Well, actually, before I get to that, one interesting point of we talk so much about the spiritual side of it and what God's requiring of us for our souls, but like we talk about for reasons why we fast, because we're composed of body and soul, and we should be doing things to enhance the good of our souls. We have to also remember, on the flip side, we are made of body and soul, and our bodies need that rest as well. In fact, I was reading something, I think I was back in college at the time. I found it very interesting. I think it was, I believe it was the Japanese that tried to implement, I think it was like a 12-day work week, and then they'd have 1 day of rest after 12 days of working, and then going forward. And they had to stop it because they started to realize that all these people were getting sick, and they were, becoming less productive, and they were it was becoming a hindrance because they didn't have that 1 day a week to rest and rejuvenate themselves. So God in his providence sees even just the physical side of things of, this is about what the human body can handle under heavy toil. And so therefore on that seventh day, he should take a bit of a rest, because that's what's going to keep him healthy and well, even from just the physical point of view. But moving on to the spiritual side, what should we do? What should we do on Sunday? And we have to remember for ourselves that Sunday is, for us as Catholics, is our Lord's Day. This is the day in which we set aside to honor and worship God, and it is a commandment, to keep holy the Sabbath, to keep holy the Lord's Day, and for us as Sunday, that we should that we should do that. It's not just church. Okay, I went to church, therefore the rest of the day is mine. I'm done with God for the day because I showed up to Mass. That's not what we're talking about here. It should be a day that's kept holy. We should have extra devotions that we do that day. Perhaps we make sure that we do a little bit of catechism study. It's always important to study our faith, and to study our catechism is one of the very important things we can do for our soul. And with Restoration Radio, I'll give a little plug out to Father Larrabee. If if you don't want to pull out the book yourself and go through and run a class for yourself of study, because maybe you're not the most organized or the self-organized or self-motivating person, then all right, then cheat a little bit and listen to Father Larrabee's radio program on the catechism. At least you're studying your catechism in that way. You can do that on Sunday, or doing extra devotions, perhaps setting aside a couple of little devotional prayers that are your Sunday prayers, which are set in addition to your normal daily devotions, or doing something like especially if you're in the Cincinnati area, where we have this available always on Sundays, and we're always plugging, and we're desperate for people to come to attend, because that's why it's there. Show up to Sunday Vespers, come back. What a great act of honor to our Lord. Then coming back to church and praying Vespers along with the clergy that are there singing Vespers, being even more intimately involved with the liturgy in that way. There are any number of holy
practices, spiritual reading, and things like that. Make Sunday a holy day. It's not that you have to go from sun up to sundown in church, and you certainly, should be encouraged to recreate and to get together for a nice big family meal or whatever. But always keeping in mind, this is the day dedicated to God, and I should set it aside for Him. I shouldn't just do the minimum this way. I should try to reap the spiritual fruits from a Sunday. So.
Yeah, and I have to say, for those people who have Vespers available and who don't take advantage of it, and it isn't because they're hosting some big dinner and they're unavailable during the time. It's not part of their Sunday plans. And I'm so excited. We've got Vespers here at our chapel coming up on the 23rd of March. So we don't always have it. So when I know that we have it, I set it aside. And for those of you who haven't, I will admit that part of me is speaking excitedly as someone who went to high school with Norbertines, who have a great love for the divine office. But I would make a point to you that if you haven't experienced Vespers or you don't think it's your thing, whatever that means, that this is a chance to actually see Catholic music live. You don't have to be a great singer. In fact, you can just keep it to yourself and just sing a little lower if you're worried about the chant. The great thing about traditional Vespers is it repeats, and after a while, you will get the tones and you will get the sense of it. But it isn't just the Mass. People talk about, it's the Mass that matters, and there's a lot of other stuff that matters too. And if you tie your faith to having the Mass, I would warn you that what happens when the Mass is taken from you, because it very well may. As someone who had to walk away from a valid but una cum Mass, it's something that I can't stress enough that if you have Vespers around, really, what's your excuse for not going? You can make you're in control of your Sunday schedule, so why don't you make dinner a little later, or have a snack before you go, or trade out if you have lots of kids. Maybe you'll let your spouse go. It's not that long. Vespers doesn't take a long time, and then you maybe treat each other. One spouse stays and takes care of the kids. So really, I can't hop on the Father's point any more strongly than go. If you haven't been to Vespers and it's at your parish, that's a disgrace, and you really should go at some point. It's an integral part of the church's worship, in addition to the Mass, and you should take advantage of that.
And an important to note, Stephen, is that we always talk about the Mass is truly your sacrifice, it's truly your Mass. Well, the same thing with divine office. It all composes of the liturgy of the church, and the office is truly the office of the entire church. Just because it's only the clergy that are bound to say the office doesn't mean that the prayers aren't there representing everybody of the church. So if it's your office anyways, then you should be able to, then you have every, right to show up and should take full advantage of showing up in order to gain those graces that are made available by it. So it's, they're there and they're yours for the taking, those graces. Take advantage of that.
I think that's something that had to sink in slowly over time. Even I don't want to say I'm a workaholic, Father, although some of my colleagues may call me a slave driver. I've tried to get better about that. That's not a virtue. But that took a while for me to sink in. So even though I've always been aware of the Sunday rule, sometimes we have to go above and beyond. And one of the things that I've and part of why the Restoration Radio schedule has shifted away from Sundays is even things that are virtues that we like to do that depend on something else, like the internet, for example. I've tried to shift away so that, we're on the internet 24/7. As you say, our body needs a Sabbath. I would argue your brain needs an internet Sabbath, and maybe consider unplugging your cable modem on Sunday morning and plugging it in after Vespers or after dinner. Anyone who needs you for anything is going to be able to reach you by telephone. There's no emergency that's going to come in over email. Obviously, I think, Father, you made that point, excepting for doctors, and you can put that on silent mode and the email can be delivered there. But I'm someone who's always working, who's always doing things, and that's something I've tried to do as well, is even be aware of the things that you are doing for good, like us recording a radio show, is that, try to do it outside of Sundays. We've made that change in the schedule, but also even sometimes the administrative back end stuff that we do to make this work is maybe on Sunday there's a break for that as well. And obviously that's not a requirement. I'm just sharing something that has helped and worked for me. And I'm just offering it as a suggestion.
Yeah, and someone who is, both a priest and someone who has worked in the business world before, for any busy person, they know that even though you might feel like I have to get, some of these things done, if you're truly, like you said, a workaholic type of person, I got to get, I just want to get these things done and whatnot. Well, if you're a busy person, there's always going to be work to be done, and there's always going to be the next thing that needs to be done. And so you should take that break and say, yeah, perhaps these things need to be done, but they don't need to be done right now. It's not on fire, so therefore it's going to be okay. It'll be there Monday. So it's
sufficient for the day is the evil thereof, right, Father?
Exactly.
For those of you who are just joining us, you are listening to Pastoralia on the Restoration Radio Network. I'm Stephen Heiner. With me today, as always, is Father Stephen McKenna, and we've had the opportunity today to talk about a lot of topics. We've talked about godparents, we've talked about the cassock and clericals, we've talked about head coverings, and we've just wrapped up talking about what you shouldn't do on Sunday, what the church says you shouldn't do on Sunday, and then made some suggestions for maybe what you should do on Sundays. As always, the church doesn't want to create a robotic life where it says you will read some catechism and you shall study some doctrine and you shall play some games with your kids and you shall do this. The church has a general principle and allows her children to make up the infinitely beautiful garden of legitimate things to do on a Sunday on their own way, depending on their temperament, their particular situation. And I think that's what we can take away from what Father said. The last segment of our show today speaks directly to what Father started the show with when we talked about Lent, and we talked about spiritual exercises. And so those of you who don't normally do Stations of the Cross, although I will make the point that there's a Devotions with Bishop Dolan show that I did with His Excellency, in which we talk about doing Stations of the Cross outside of Lent. But that's a good thing to do. Don't make it a Lenten devotion. But let's say you're doing Stations of the Cross, or you've decided to say the St. Michael Chaplet, or you're adding something. I'd like to propose something to you via the show topic today to think about doing this Lent. And that's a general confession. Now, Father, can you explain to us what's a general confession? How do we go about doing that? And should we just show up in the queue for confession and ambush the priest with a general confession?
All right. So a general confession is a confession that is made of not just, your recent sins, the sins that you may have committed from your last confession, which is the normal for people approaching confession, but it is a confession of sins of one's whole life, a rehashing the lifelong fallings that we've had away from grace, and confessing them in one giant lump confession. And there needs to be a distinction here of two different types of a general confession. You have one which is of the one example of confession of general confession, which we'd say is one of necessity, or as we like to call it, the catch up and clean up confession. And that's for somebody that either was not a Catholic during their life and now has converted over to Catholicism, or someone who's coming over from Novus Ordo and you have all those questions of, were these true priests? Were they, was my confessions that were heard during this time, but, were good and valid confessions? Or, did I know enough about, sin due to the lack of teaching in the Nova Ordo Church about those things to make a good confession, to have made good confessions at that time? So there's the necessity one, which should be done for those people. So if you're listening and you are a recent comer to traditional Catholicism, you should make it a plan to do that catch up and clean up confession. And then there's the other side of it, which is the ones of devotion. Those are for those who are already practicing Catholics, traditional Catholics, and that they're that for whatever reason they are coming to the point that they want to to renew their sorrow for past sins of their life, and it's not to just purely gain absolution for sins unconfessed, but more of a confession that is just done for devotional purposes and renewing that sorrow for sin. On either one of those, it should not be I show up half an hour before Sunday Mass and just hop in line and expect to bombard Father with a general confession. No, because that's any of the scheduled times of confession at your parish are times that are for normal regular confessions, if you will, because general confession takes more time, and it should be something that is actually scheduled as an appointment to come in for. And with that, anytime that you deal, a catch up and clean up confession should be done, and you should get in touch with your priest and schedule something and say, Father, I think I should do this because I had all this time in the Novus Ordo, and I don't know which sins were forgiven and which ones weren't, or I came over from Protestantism, and I just kind of, the parish I went to, nobody inquired about it, and I kind of just started going along with the program and started receiving the sacraments or something like that. Hopefully that's not the case, but if anyways, those true necessity ones, or I guess you could also put in there the necessity of well, I guess I'll come back to that point. But yeah, any kind of necessity ones should be just, get in touch with your priest and schedule something like that. As for the ones of devotion, you should. It's not something to just be done whenever you want to. We don't want to, keep hitting these general confessions all the time. But it should be something that's done on. If it's wanted to be done, then it could be something that's done on specific big happenings in someone's life. So oftentimes, the number one thing that we see is this change in life. So if you're a single person and you're about to get married, that's a change in your state of life, and it's a good opportunity, if you would like to ask the priest to hear a general confession, because you're changing your life in a major way, and you'd like to, as it were, truly start off from in a spiritual point of view, from a new beginning, if you in that new state of life, or someone being ordained or entering religious life might be a change of life that would happen. Another one would be for devotion in case of an illness. So someone who is really ill and perhaps there's a danger of them dying, they may want to make a general confession for that peace of soul, so that they can go and meet their Maker, if that's what God is calling to them at that point, with confidence, with true confidence that you're kind of making sure you're renewing that true sorrow for sin, so that God knows expressly. He knows your heart obviously already, but He knows from your words that you're sorry for everything that you've ever done to commit Him and to offend Him. So So that's a good and pious time to have a general confession, or even something like a retreat. If you're making a retreat and the priests are available to do so during that retreat, maybe that might be an occasion where you might want to make a general confession. But anyway, if you're thinking about making a general confession, you should always call a priest that you know and who knows you, and ask him, I would like to make a general confession. What do you think about it? And if the priest knows you, then he will let you know whether it is good for your soul or not. Oftentimes we have ideas that are good for our souls, but they're not necessarily the right thing for our souls at that moment. We don't want to be making general confessions all the time, because one of two things. One, it can possibly lead towards scrupulosity, that mindset that, I've confessed it before, but I want to make sure that it's forgiven. Well, if you've confessed it before and you were sorry before, it is forgiven, and we shouldn't ever, doubt that, or in any kind of way, or feel like, oh, I got to make sure I'm covering my bases, but if we've been making good confessions, then we should have no worry in that way. It's and also,
yes, indeed, this was something that plagued Luther a lot. He was always worried that he had forgotten something in confession, and this was a recurrent theme for him.
Right, and if we truly, and as our catechism would tell us, if we truly forget something, then God understands that. And if you truly forget something and you would have confessed it had you remembered it, then God treats it as forgiven. And it's always the good practice to end your normal confessions with, for these and all my past sins, or for these and any sins I may have forgotten. And because, it's kind of like your catch-all, just to let God, just to express that you're sorry for anything that you've ever done. But, every time you go to confession, doesn't mean that you have to run and make a general confession afterwards. Once something's forgiven, it's forgiven, and we just move forward in that way. So a priest who knows you is the one who you want to approach, and you want to approach it as a question. Is this something I should do? Should I make a general confession? And perhaps the priest might say, no, it's not good for you, because you did one 2 years ago, and you don't need to come back and do it again. Or perhaps the priest would say, yeah, it might be something that's beneficial to you to make a good confession. In making those general confessions of devotion, now, like I said, we're still talking of the ones of devotion. It's also important that priest who knows you, because it is your goal is, once again, not to just to rehash all sins that you've done, but to find a way of spiritual growth from that point. And so I was talking to Bishop Dolan about the show beforehand, and he says when it comes to a confession of the devotion, they should go for if they want the fruit, they should go to the root, meaning that it's not necessarily, if it's just a purely devotional general confession, then it's you're not necessarily really worried in every number and species of every sin, but to say but that devotional general confession is made in generalities. For X number of years of my life, I was guilty maybe twice a week of gluttony, and the reason for it, I believe, is just attachment to my own comforts of flesh, rather than searching after the higher good, which was God. And at that point, that way you're looking for, this is why in my past I committed these sins, and this is a good reminder of how I can grow from it. I've found I'm going to that root of the problem it's not that I'm reconfessing gluttony, but it's confessing that I, for this time of my life, was very attached to my own physical comforts, and I need to be more devoid of that and more focused on my spiritual good rather than my physical comfortability. And so you're searching for the root of the question in those general confessions. And like I said, just done in a general way for devotion. Now, if we're talking about a catch-up, the necessity general confession, then it should be more focused. It should be truly searching through our lives and finding all the mortal sins of our lives and confessing them in number and species, just like any other confession. And because when it comes to that general confession of necessity, we're talking about something that truly is a confession of those sins, because there's something there that makes us wonder, that is a legitimate concern as to whether these sins have been truly forgiven or not. And so we would do that examination of conscience and find a good examination of conscience, find a few good examinations of conscience, because none of them will claim to have all of the different types of sins. So try to pull from as many as you can, and sit down and write it down for yourself, because you don't want to forget them. You're talking about your whole life, and oftentimes people will ask me, how do you do an examination for my entire life of, I'm 30 years old. How do I confess 30 years of sinfulness, when I was never anywhere near God whatsoever? How do I go about that? And what I always recommend is breaking our lives up sections and then examining that section of our life. So, okay, I'll take time from the age of reason until through middle school time or junior high school, and that's one chunk of life. Then high school and college time, and then time after college until now. You've broken your life up into three sections where perhaps our simple inclinations during those times were more alike, and then now we can attack our examination of each section more easily than it would be to attack it as one just giant life point. And then we go through and we note, like I said, the type of sin and the number of times of committing such a sin, for a mortal sin in that time, to the best of our ability. Because once again, it's not about our memory as much as it's about God's mercy in confession. And so we might say, okay, from the time I was in high school, I entered high school until the time I graduated from university, I would commit the sin of anger on average probably about 4 times a week, of saying something out of anger and in an uncharitable way towards my neighbor. That's, maybe some weeks I had less, maybe some weeks I had more, but at least it gives me a ballpark, number of how many times I would have done it. And then if there's certain things that we may have done once or twice in our life, then we confess it as such. I did this, 2 times and whatnot. And so that's how we would approach a general confession of necessity, being more specific and trying to get all of the mortal sins that we can think of and confessing them that way. And then, but once again, the main point of either one of those general confessions is to know ourselves, like that idea of going to that root of the problem, and to know ourselves so we can grow and overcome our own faults and feelings that we all have, and to know God and to know His mercy. That's the most important things to take away from any general confession, is to know ourselves so we can grow and know God and who He is, and to know that in that, knowing the mercy of God, realizing that He's not there trying to trip us up, trying to shoot us down. He's there trying to work for us to get to heaven. And so therefore, by confessing our sins, they're forgiven. And if He forgives them, then I need to forgive myself for those sins. And I need to just learn from them and move on and try to grow in grace and grow towards God in my day-to-day life.
Father, I've been blessed to have had a chance to do a few general confessions. My first was at an Ignatian retreat when I was younger, and then I've done it in intervals of 3 or 4 years. I think it's probably been 3 or 4 years since my last general confession. I have to go back and look at my journal, but I see it as to put it in worldly terms so that people might understand. And I say, well, Steve, I've never heard of this. Father, I've never heard of this before. Is it for me? I want to pick up a theme that you talked about improvement, going to the root. I look at it as an employee review in a way. What's the point of an employee review? When I sit down with my staff to do it, I want to take an opportunity to praise them for the things that they've done well, but I also want to look at areas of improvement. And one of the overwhelming things, when you go back and you do a general confession and you say, wow, it looks like I really had a problem with anger, or wow, I really had this challenge with my parents. In some ways, it can be discouraging because you'll look and you'll see that, you failed in all these ways, but by the flip side, you can also see where you've improved. You can say, well, I certainly didn't have that issue with anger, at that point, from that point forward, or I've gotten better with it. Mm-hmm. And so it's great in the humility that it imposes, but it's also great in the grace that comes with it. So I can recommend it for myself. Father, I'm sure, as you might have been approaching priesthood or other stages, you might have gone through one yourself. Can you share any reflections on how it helped you yourself as a Christian growing in your own spiritual life?
Yeah, I've done. I've made 2 general confessions in my life. One was, like you said, early on in my coming over to tradition, when before I was, as I was still growing, I made an Ignatius retreat at the time, and we did a general confession then. And the other time was right before my ordination to the subdiaconate, because for me in my journey towards the priesthood, that's the point of, as we'd like to say, the no turning back point. That's when you're locked in by the vows of celibacy and the vow of saying your office daily. And so in those 2 times, those were, one was a retreat and one was a change of life. And so they were very good for me because, like you said, it lets you know where you've grown from and where you have, and what you can see what you've done to make that growth, so you can continue doing so. And it lets you see areas where you still need to grow. Okay, well, I still fall into this area, so I need to improve upon this. And then lastly, sometimes, is that, because everybody's different, sometimes people will find in their lives that perhaps they've grown a little more lax in a certain area, and that gives the opportunity for them to realize that, like, oh, I didn't do this 5 years ago, but now I find myself occasionally falling into this. What was I doing then that I'm not doing now? And how can I bring myself back to that original fervor that I had before? But that being said, in a universal idea, general confessions, yes, they are a good thing for someone to do on occasion. But once again, I wanted to stress that point that talk to your priest, and a priest that knows who you are and knows your personality before doing a devotional general confession. Because, like I said, while as a whole, general confessions certainly are a good thing, it may not be good for you, or it may not be good for you at this time. And the priest who knows you will know that. And ultimately, what we're looking for from a general confession is something that's going to be for the betterment of my spiritual good. And if a priest recognizes that it's not for your spiritual good at that time, then you wouldn't want to do it, because it'd actually be contrary to the purpose of that general confession. So talk to, if it's something that you are thinking of and you haven't done in a long time, or you haven't done ever, and something that you perhaps are thinking about doing, talk to your priest, the one that that knows who you are well, and ask him what he thinks of the idea, and then just follow his advice, and you won't go wrong in doing so. You'll either way the priest decides in that regard will be something that will be ultimately for the best of your soul. So, and that's what the idea of general confession is. What's best for my soul and my growth in my faith.
And we're going to do another show on confession in the future, Father, so I don't really want to touch on this too much. But then the question, Father will know who I am going to confession. And again, we'll talk about this when we get to the confession show, to sort of dismiss this this silly idea, as if A, Father cares what happens, or B, that you think that you got the biggest sin. Father's heard worse. Whatever you've got, Father's heard worse. So don't try to be the big bragger thinking that you brought the biggest sins to Father. So Father, just to address that, someone says, well, Father, you're saying I need to consult with the priest and then I have to make arrangements with the priest. That means the priest is going to know from the beginning that it's me, and he's going to hear this horror show of the last 20 years, the last 30 years. How can we get beyond that?
Well, first off is that, the spirit of the priest is always that of the father to the prodigal son. That we're just so happy that in any type of confessional situation, we're just so happy that someone is approaching the sacrament and having sins forgiven. So, a situation, a thought that, the priest is going to be shocked or angered by something is contrary to what it is. And then also that idea that, we're really trying to keep track of who's saying what, or even remember who did what. You hear so many confessions that, generally speaking, it all basically just blends into one big glob of people's sins, and you forget about it as soon as the door closes, pretty much, and move on. And I can speak for all priests and say that we all have more important things to do than try to remember who did what in their own personal sins. And lastly, that it's a point that, like you said, you'd have to do something earth moving to really shock any priest or take them by surprise. It doesn't take very long for a priest to hear just about any type of the major sins that run throughout the entire world. Pretty much have been heard by any priest who's been hearing confessions for a couple of years, so or even less probably. So it's it's all stuff we've heard before, and it's all things that we're just there to forgive sins. We're not there to keep tabs. So don't worry at all about it. So not a problem.
Father, I thought we did a pretty good job today, considering our last two shows where we were dealing with really large themes of handling a few different questions today. So thanks so much for your time. Anything that, as we were going on, you thought you might want to circle back to that we didn't have an opportunity to talk about before I let you go?
No, I think we covered basically anything. And
Father, thanks again for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me, Steve.
All right. Again, as always, all of us here at the Restoration Radio Network would ask that if you found this show to be informative, helpful, or in any way beneficial to you and to your faith, you please consider making whatever donation is possible to our apostolate, no matter how small it might be. To those of you who have donated, a heartfelt thank you for your kindness and generosity. Remember that above and beyond material contributions, the most important donation you can make to our work here is prayer. Please think of offering a Mass, a Rosary, or simply even an Ave for our work the next time you pray. If you have any questions or comments, or would like to reproduce our copyrighted work on your channel in some format, we'd love to hear from you. For the Restoration, I am Stephen Heiner. May God bless you.
This program was brought to you free of charge by the sponsorship of Novus Ordo Watch. See for yourself that the Church of the Second Vatican Council is not in fact the Catholic Church of the ages. Go to novusordowatch.org.